Discussing another viewer suggestion, this time from YouTube user JustBecause77. Thank you in advance. Our case today is the kidnapping and murder of Jimmy Ryce. Although it's horrific, Jimmy's death resulted in law changes that have since helped shape the way missing children are searched for and predators are handled. So as always, I ask you to join me as we remember Jimmy Ryce. Samuel James Ryce, who went by Jimmy, was born on September 26, 1985 in Redland, Florida, to parents Donald and Claudine Ryce. Don, who was originally from Louisiana, worked as a labor relations attorney and had a successful law practice. Prior to Claudine, Don was married to his first wife, Reba. Together, the couple shared 2 children, Theodore and Martha. They would go on to divorce in 1981. He met Claudine sometime after, and the two married in 1983. Together, they raised his 2 children before welcoming their own son in 1985. Claudine also worked as an attorney, and the family thrived. They took trips together and were very close to each other. Jimmy was a gifted student. He entered the 5th grade in 1995. Jimmy's favorite subject was reading, but he disliked when stories ended on a sad note. He always wore a smile on his face and had an interest in the arts. He was learning to play piano and often painted self-portraits. But his true love was baseball. Jimmy had aspirations of going professional and playing in the MLB, but he had a fallback option as well. If he couldn't play ball, he would be a scientist and help cure diseases. Don and Claudine described their son as a gift from God. The morning of September 11, 1995 started like so many before. Jimmy got up and went to school. He took the bus to and from. That afternoon, around 3:07 p.m., he was dropped off at the usual stop around 250 yards from his house in the rural area of South Miami-Dade County. He headed for home and nearly made it with less than a block to walk, when a truck suddenly stopped in front of him and blocked his path. As the time ticked on, Jimmy's parents grew concerned. He was a very responsible child and wouldn't wander off. They had a bad feeling that something happened to Jimmy. Law enforcement launched a massive search campaign that very afternoon with dozens of volunteers combing the area around Jimmy's bus stop. A helicopter was deployed over the area as well. Posters and flyers were created and distributed. They did anything to help put Jimmy's name out there. Jimmy's disappearance was well publicized. For months, neighbors and volunteers across South Florida searched fields, farms, and canals, while his family continued to circulate his picture. The disappearance of Jimmy traumatized families all over Florida. The Ryce family was in the public eye often and gained community support. They held their composure in front of the media and just knew their son was out there and alive. Law enforcement and search teams alike awaited any kind of update regarding Jimmy, but sadly, there were no new leads. After 3 months of the unknown, everyone waited with bated breath as a new lead was followed. Susan Shinehouse, a local rancher, reported to police in August or September of 1995 that she suspected items were missing from her home, and her hired ranch hand was responsible. She explained a handgun and jewelry were gone, and Juan Carlos Chavez was the culprit. Juan Chavez was a Cuban immigrant who arrived in the United States sometime in 1991. In Cuba, he was part of a counter-revolutionary group where he was imprisoned for attempting to escape and stealing military property. Other than his arrest in Cuba, Chavez had no additional criminal record. Once in America, he worked odd jobs until he was hired on as the ranch hand for the Shinehouse farm. While under their employment, Juan was provided a trailer to live in and permitted to use their Ford pickup truck to complete his duties. Susan explained Juan lived on their property and she had a feeling her missing items were in his possession. But police notified her that without evidence, he couldn't be charged. Susan decided to do her own investigation. On December 5, 1995, while Juan was away, Susan and her son Edward entered the trailer with the assistance of a locksmith. Upon entry, she noticed a firearm left on the counter, and upon closer inspection, she identified it as hers. As she continued to search for her jewelry, she stumbled on a closet with a book bag tucked away in the back. The bag, which was partially opened, was removed and examined. She discovered papers and books which appeared to have a child's handwriting. Inside of the cover of the book, she read the owner's name, Jimmy Ryce. Susan contacted the FBI and a plan was set in place. When Juan returned home around 7:15 p.m. the following day, December 6th, he was ambushed by armed agents and taken into custody. He was transported to the Miami-Dade Police Department for questioning. During the interrogation, Juan was read his Miranda rights, which he indicated he fully understood and waived his rights. Initially, Juan provided several accounts of his involvement with Jimmy's disappearance, in which the narrative always changed. In one instance, he claimed he accidentally ran him over and put his body in a canal, where divers were sent to search for hours with no results. Investigators pressured Juan that it was time for him to get down to the truth. They wanted to know where Jimmy was. The known evidence contradicted his original accounts, and police grew tired of his stories. Eventually, Juan left the room for a break, and when he returned, he stated, "What do you want to know? I'll tell you what happened to Jimmy Ryce." Juan provided permission for his sworn statement and started talking. On September 11th, Juan admitted he abducted Jimmy Ryce from his bus stop at gunpoint. He stated prior to encountering Jimmy, he noticed a group of young boys playing in a nearby creek while on his way home from the hardware store around 3 p.m. Juan explained he was attracted to minor boys and blamed this on an assault he experienced by a relative as a child. The young boys were in their underwear, which only caught his interest more, but he drove off, not acting on his impulses. But as he got further and further away, he couldn't get the image out of his head, so he turned the truck around to take another look. While driving back to the location, he saw another young boy walking in the opposite direction. At first, he thought this was one of the boys from earlier, but it turned out to be Jimmy Ryce. Juan turned the truck around and blocked Jimmy's path. He armed himself with the .38 Taurus revolver he stole from his employer before exiting the vehicle. He approached Jimmy and asked, "Do you want to die?" before showing the boy the gun. Jimmy replied no. Juan then ordered Jimmy into the cab of the truck through the driver's side, and he followed right behind him. Once in the vehicle, Juan told Jimmy to remove his backpack and put his head down so no one would see him. He placed the revolver on his lap and drove him back to the horse ranch, which wasn't far from the bus stop. Parked in front of the trailer, Jimmy and Juan exited the truck, leaving behind the boy's backpack. Juan led Jimmy into the trailer where once inside, he made him sit down on the bed. He explained he sat across from Jimmy in an office chair by the front door and tried to talk to him. Jimmy's demeanor, according to Juan, was nervous and scared. He started sobbing and asked Juan, "Why did you take me?" Juan avoided answering him and instead attempted to have him answer his own questions. He stated this exchange lasted for minutes before he decided to move on to the reason he took Jimmy in the first place. He made Jimmy remove his clothes and lay on the bed, where he then assaulted the young boy. Jimmy was held at his trailer for 3 hours. Once he was done carrying out his horrific plan, he made Jimmy redress and return to the truck. Juan explained he had no intentions of keeping Jimmy, and he planned to drop him off at the same place he was abducted. But as they approached the scene, police presence was heavy. Juan immediately suspected they were searching for Jimmy, so he pushed the boy's head low to the floor and returned to the trailer. Inside, Jimmy was terrified. He was crying and unclear of what his future held. He asked his captor what he planned to do with him. Juan tried to console the child by talking to him and asking questions. While the two were talking, Juan claimed a helicopter was heard overhead, and in a panic he pulled Jimmy close to him so he wouldn't go anywhere. He knew it was part of the search efforts for the boy. After he heard the helicopter fly over several more times, he decided to get up and peek out of the window. While doing so, he was distracted, and Jimmy, who he left next to the front door, made a run for it. Juan claimed as he heard Jimmy attempting to leave the trailer, he panicked and got tripped up in the bathroom, where he landed on the floor. He tried to reach up and grab Jimmy, but he was out of reach, so instead he pulled out the revolver and pointed it at Jimmy before firing once. Jimmy was struck in the torso and he collapsed by the front door. Juan stated after he shot Jimmy, he got himself up and quickly turned Jimmy over, where he held him until he took his last breath. To dispose of Jimmy's body, Juan chose to place him in a metal barrel until he could come up with a more permanent solution. He brought the metal barrel over to his broken-down van, which he left on his employer's property, and returned to the trailer. Back at home, Juan noticed blood on his clothes and panicked, so he destroyed them. He spent that night and the following morning formulating a plan. 2 days after Jimmy's murder, He took a backhoe on the property and attempted to dig a deep enough hole to bury him, but it wasn't working properly. He noticed after several days the top of the barrel popped off, and Juan knew he had to move him. He explained he removed Jimmy from the barrel and started dismembering him. He was unaware of the proper term of the tool he used, but described it to the best of his abilities. The tool was later determined to be a bush hook. Once finished, Jimmy was placed into 3 different planters. He moved the planters to the nearby horse stables and poured cement on top of them. Following the recording of his official statement, Juan provided consent for law enforcement to search his property and even agreed to go with them on 2 separate occasions to point out where the events took place. On December 8, 1995, law enforcement descended upon the trailer where several pieces of evidence were taken, including the loaded handgun, a poster of a young boy bearing likeness to Jimmy Ryce, a box of bullets, 1 spent shell casing, a water-based lubricant, a couch cushion, and part of the wooden floor next to the door. Both of the cushion and the wooden floor piece were sent in for serology testing. At the time, they did not have Jimmy's body, so swabs from his parents were taken and compared to the blood found in the trailer. It was determined the blood samples collected were extremely likely to have come from their child. Juan's fingerprints were lifted from the gun and also on Jimmy's backpack and books found inside. But the biggest piece of evidence were the 3 planters containing Jimmy's remains. The remains were decomposed beyond recognition, so dental records were used to positively identify Jimmy. The sections recovered were x-rayed in an attempt to locate the fatal bullet. The jacket was lodged near his heart and appeared to enter the body at an upward trajectory. The evidence was removed and compared to 2 other samples, a .38 caliber casing which came from the box in the trailer and a casing that was fired from the gun. The casing and the sample from Jimmy were found to be a match. On December 20, 1995, Juan was indicted on several charges including first-degree murder, assault on a victim under 12, and kidnapping with a deadly weapon. His trial started in 1998, where Juan testified in his own defense. He claimed after being brought to the police station, he was mistreated. They took all of his possessions and only promised to give them back after he confessed. He claimed he was denied sleep and he was made to go through Jimmy's backpack so his fingerprints would be on all the contents. He alleged he was made to tell lies, and in order to avoid deportation, he said whatever they wanted. Law enforcement refuted these claims, stating everything Juan provided was on his own accord with a translator present. He also claimed the statement he made was under duress, and that his employer's husband, Ed, was the real killer. He claimed he was merely an accomplice and helped Ed dispose of the body. However, a big issue with this angle was although Ed was on house arrest, at the time of Jimmy's murder, he was given special permission by his parole officer to go to a client's house that day, so he wasn't even at the property. On September 18, 1998, the jury found Juan guilty on all charges against him. During the penalty phase, they recommended he be given the death penalty. His sentencing trial took place on November 23, 1998, where Juan was sentenced to death for the first-degree murder charge and given life without parole for his other 2 charges. The trial preoccupied the state of Florida, dominating the news headlines. The Ryce home became a memorial for Jimmy, a place members of the community could mourn publicly. Dawn and Claudine became determined to turn Jimmy's horrific death into something positive. They felt in part they owed something to all of the people who tried to help find Jimmy. They refused to let it get the best of them. Together, they founded the Jimmy Ryce Center for Victims of Predatory Abduction, a nonprofit organization based in Vero Beach, Florida. The center works to increase public awareness and educate on predators. It also provides counseling for parents of victims and helps train law enforcement agencies on ways to respond to missing children cases. The organization also has a program in which they provide free of charge bloodhounds to police departments around the country. The Ryce family felt if police searching for Jimmy had bloodhounds, they might have had a better chance in tracking him down. Due to the dedication of the Ryce family, many practices in place today for missing children were established. Stranger danger programs for schools were created, missing children posters were allowed to be posted in government buildings, and they also worked closely with the state of Florida to establish a database for predators. Most significantly, though, they got the Jimmy Ryce Act passed in Florida. Signed into law on May 19, 1998, the Jimmy Ryce Act essentially keeps predators in prison who were found to likely repeat their crimes. They can be detained through civil commitment even if their prison sentence is served. In order to be released, they have to prove rehabilitation. Similar acts have been adopted by other states around the country. From behind prison bars, Juan attempted several appeals, but each time he was denied, and his death sentence was upheld. On February 12, 2014, Juan's sentence was carried out at the Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. Initially, it was delayed by 2 hours due to a last-minute request for a stay of execution, due to the sedative used in lethal injection being an ineffective pain reliever, but it was rejected and carried out as scheduled. Juan had no last words other than a rambling note in which he made no apologies and didn't claim innocence. Instead, he proclaimed his faith and wished Christ's love on those who in their pain desire his death, stating, "No man or word will rob me of my peace today." He had no visitors other than a spiritual advisor, and his last meal consisted of steak, french fries, a fruit cup, strawberry ice cream, and mango juice. He was given the lethal injection and pronounced dead at 8:07 p.m. After his execution, Don Ryce told reporters he had a message for future child predators. Don't kill the child. Don't kill the child. Because if you do, people will not forget. They will not forgive. We will hunt you down and we will put you to death. Sadly, Claudine died in 2009 from a heart attack, and Martha took her life in 2012. And despite the loss of not only his youngest son, daughter, and wife, Don never faded in his dedication to the safety of children. Don stated his wife would say any time a child was saved by one of the bloodhounds, it was like getting a hug from Jimmy. They felt this type of thing shouldn't happen to any child, and as a society, we have to be willing to do what it takes to do a far better job at protecting our kids. On October 3, 2020, Don Ryce passed away. His last words to his friends and family were to keep the Jimmy Ryce Center going. His eldest son, Ted, and those involved in the center continue to carry on the Ryce's work in honor of Jimmy's memory.